Mr. President, thank you. I just want to say, I mean, this is a damning indictment of democracy and of the compact between thieves and of the experience of the last 20 years. We've heard it from the horse's mouth. Thank you, Mr. Peto. Now, maybe for those in future people who come to the SWOP breakfasts, maybe you must know that if you want to attract my attention, you should wear a nice cap, because I can see there's a guy with a blue cap who's had his hand up for a long time. There's a guy with a black cap who I know very well who's also got his hand up. So we're going to go to blue cap and then my comrade over here. But first, yeah.
I just want to say there's something, I'll speak on my capacity on behalf of that, but from doing business with mines. Father asked, says something is wrong somewhere. I'll tell you, there are other people that we don't put accountable, the private sector, and we haven't touched them. I'll just tell you about the structure of doing business with mines. There's royalties which are paid out of the mining licenses. Then there will be the CSI fund. This is where they are saying we are fighting poverty alleviation, women empowerment in the mines, will give the money to do the bids, and then the youth will build schools. Funny enough, the person who handles these funds is a CSI manager, a woman sitting here in Johannesburg. Now, how do you have a corporate social investment and then the budget is being handled by just some scholar who is sitting here in Johannesburg? How does she know that there are schools that need to be built? How does she know that there are clinics that need to be built? So in order to destroy the system, if Sonwabile can intervene to way forward, you are having the chief who is having his own budget. And then you are having the mining, which is controlling the CSI budget. I think there should be a bridge which is being built, whereby the CSI office goes and be opened up in the mining community. There is no way that you're going to have a CSI office in Johannesburg and then you're going to have a scholar who's coming from Johannesburg or from UCT in Cape Town being assigned to look after the poverty of Bakgatla that she doesn't know. And then the office should have the people of the community who will be the task team to oversee the person and start telling them about some of the social, economic issues of the office. I think I'm finished.
Norman.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Norman from Kosatu. Akitamishe Baba all protocol observed, because I'm also from a royal family. My grandfather was the traditional healer in the royal family. So I've got about 4 elements that I want to ask the researcher. One is, how has the evolution of speaking truth to power changed? Because in many instances, my guess is that in our culture, we saw it in Parliament on Thursday when they were supposed to ask the President questions, and then the Speaker of Parliament said we are not equal in the Parliament. And also that applies in the royal family. You can't speak truth to power to the chief. I think it's something that I want you to just shape us for us, because that is a limiting factor when you are supposed to confront the chief. Certain ways you can't use against a chief. Can you unpack that dimension? The other thing is, in our culture, we pay the blue-blooded.
Yeah.
We pay royalness. In other words, if I have a wedding, a portion of the meat must go to the royal family as a thanking gift to the royal house. It's how we were in a church when we were growing. So I want you to also unpack that concept, because when the mine gives money to the royal family, in cultural practices, is regarded as a gift that should not be accounted for, should not be sent for auditors general to account for, because it is a royal gift. The other dimension is on the question of the advisory councils within the chieftaincy. In many instances, fortunately in my royal house, there are no what you call camps. But all these tensions sometimes arose because of juxtaposition. In my royal family, I'm told my family is second to the one of the chief, and there are other, they call them the horror. So if the horrors are fighting for number one in the eyes of the chieftaincy, it brings tension. I want you to paint that picture vis-a-vis the resources that are in that area. Because if the royal crops or the horrors are fighting for positions and influence in the face of the chief, allocation of resources will always be biased to those that are in support of the chief, in order to despise those that are not in support of the chief, and take that challenge also for us. But the last thing, in any struggle, there are instruments that we use in the long term to win the struggle. And one of the instruments is education. One of the instruments that is used in many models of chieftaincy is that the royal family always will be taken to posh schools, so that they are armed with education, so that when the chief lacks certain advices, he will always tap on them for some advices. And I just want you to paint that aspect, because why we in these communities there is a lot of noise about jobs. It's because people who are educated come and become engineers, and you can't take a local person and say you're an engineer, and that brings tension. That is why the Amampondo and other tribal groupings now they fight, and that is why rock drillers, they will always say that it's a job for the Amampondo, because they are used to hardships, they are used to fight, they are used to, those kind of prejudices that are always thrown in the mining industry. The role of education as another dimension. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Comrade. Thanks, Comrade Kasati. Now we know why royalties are called royalties. Melanie, you had a...
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much to Sonwabile, to all of the speakers. This is incredibly fascinating and illuminating. And I think partially following on the last question, I just wanted to ask you to speak more about forms of resistance and how power is operating. Because I think the history you gave of purchasing of land in these areas and people feeling that they were forced into this Bakgatla identity or governance is really important, and I want to understand more how that shapes the forms that resistance takes and the limits on resistance, because what we're hearing is there's huge limits. So I think it links with some of what was previously asked. But how is power operating, and most importantly, how can this be broken out of? So thanks for you, but for other people from the community as well.
Okay, that hand at the back. That'll be the last one on this round, and then we'll go to the next.
Sonwabile, I understand Bakgatla-ba-Kgafela, their paramount chief is Kgafela, who is exiled from Botswana. What I want to understand...
Sorry, why don't you just say who you are?
Yeah,
Like
what I want to understand...
Won't you tell us?
My name is
Where you come from?
I work for benchmarks. But what I want to understand is that now you have the chief And I'm aware that there is a conflict between the paramount chief, Kgafela, and Chief Mnwana. Does this conflict really play itself out within the nation as you, especially with the resources now?
Okay, these are very meaty questions. So, Sonwabile, you have the powers to chew as much as you like, or to not chew and eat the other one.
Okay, quite a number of interesting questions and comments. One, I think my brother there who spoke about private sector, I think someone from that corner. You are right. I mean, it is crucial. I mean, that the private sector is always left unaccountable in most instances. I'll just highlight one element. For instance, when you look at the IDPs and how, and trying to trace whether there are synergies between the IDP and the social labor plans of the mines and the needs of the community, you find out that there's disparities. And how the mines investment, the investment initiatives of the mines are far-fetched. I mean, in fact, this is the same question I've addressed, with you. I think he has also confirmed that as well. I think this is an area which needs significant focus because the gap is huge. Mines can do whatever they want and they can report about it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are addressing the real needs of the community. I mean, which one questions whether there is earnest evolution on the side of the mine to do, good in the communities where they operate. Norman, the first question, evolution of speaking truth to power. I think it's a very important issue you are raising. And I think as well, if you look back at history and how, because completely, the colonial state operated, although it used the same institutions that were there, but it sort of introduced chieftaincy as if it was the only main political unit in Africa, and kingships. But there were other political units. There were clans. And this whole notion of a clenched fist local despot who cannot be challenged, and to whom power, who cannot be challenged, and especially down by people that he leads, is a colonial concept. That's what they did with the Zulu monarch when they interpreted it, and that's why that's how they constructed the question of how Chaga was this local despot. No one could. So this is the whole thing about how the colonialists viewed Africans. But there were structures of accountability. And differing, we find that, differing from place to place. In some kingdoms, the Queen Mother and other women would have a lot of influence on whether the army would go and fight or not. So, do you see what I'm talking about? So speaking truth to power, this whole thing that you cannot challenge the chief. The chief is the person. Don't speak to, this is not there. It's not, it cannot be historical and it cannot be entertained in this day and age. People have got to speak truth to power. The royal gift, I don't agree, because the chiefs enter into this relationship on behalf of the communities. It's not their gift at all. That's something that cannot be entertained at all. They enter, if you look at the MBRDA on why certain communities were allowed to continue to receive revenues, royalties from the mine, because they had to prove that, although that was never followed, they had to prove that this was for developmental purposes. So, in the new order. So this is not a gift at all. I know that some of the mines, for instance, in Limpopo, some of the mine bosses have been giving leopard skin to chiefs from Australia and elsewhere, but that could be regarded as a gift, but not the revenues that come out of the people's land.
Sorry, but wasn't the question, is that how the chiefs see it?
Yeah.
That was the question.
No, I think okay, if that was a question, thanks for correcting me then. If that was a question then, I don't think chiefs are so foolish to see it as a gift. They know that they enter in these transactions on behalf of the people. I think they know. They know they can distinguish. Anyone can distinguish between a gift and so and royalties and revenues are different. I mean, when they enter into this business contract and they sign on behalf of Bakgatla, and they sit on those boards as directors on behalf of Bakgatla, not as a gift to them. I think they are very much aware. Right, very important issue we are raising about the decorum and the political struggles. I mean, within the ruling, they are everywhere. I mean, even in the Bakgatla, you know. But I think the most important thing from what we have found for now, such struggles really, one cannot clearly see, because what you see is that there's a generic dissatisfaction throughout the villages, right? About how the chief is handling the affairs, about how the tribal authority is handling the affairs. So, I mean, if I could go way back, these struggles are dated way back in the 1850s, going forward, you know. And, I mean, like I've highlighted, that in the 1860s, different signs of Kgosipilane, I mean, scattered all over Pilane's land, and they led independent groups of Bakgatla. Do you see what I'm talking about? And although that history plays out anytime. Now, the extent to which the current struggles over mining revenues, I mean, and land, play out in such struggles would be an interesting thing to look at. But I think the most important issue for now, which is clouding these struggles to see whether they have a significant role, is the fact that the chief, I mean, as we have heard from Mr. Pepet and generally from the community members, that there's enormous unaccountability on the side of the chief and the mines and the mines. So I think that sort of clouds the wrangles within the political lineage. And as to whether, of course, they have intensified. I highlight that in the light of the struggles. Because, for instance, Eric, also coming also to your question, well, I think it links to what you have said. The chief, the Kgotsikgolo of Bakgatla in Botswana came in 2008 and called this current chief the current chief here to account. And then when I talk about Kgotsikgolo, I don't want to go into details on how it was structured, because I mean it all goes to the colonial, to the struggles during colonial era, and the demands by Boers for labor, which forced one of the chief of Bakgatla to leave South Africa and leaving this group, I mean a group of Bakgatla here, Botswana, and then the group of Bakgatla in Botswana was regarded as senior to the group of Bakgatla in South Africa. So all that's all history then. And then the chief from that side came in and tried to call the chief in South Africa to account. And that is when in 2008, that is when the struggles intensified. But I'm not going to go into that battle, because I don't think at this point, I mean at this point in the age, it could have any significance in some of the issues being raised. But the question around accountability. Because what happened is that South African state, to my surprise, because in the past, throughout the history, they have allowed the chiefs from Botswana to appoint chiefs in South Africa of Bakgatla. But in 2008, when the chief in Botswana wanted to remove this current chief, the state did not act. So you can see who is controlling whom. And who, I mean, that the state chooses a certain chief and the state operates within that framework. So you can see where power lies within this issue now. But it is no longer about who the people want, I mean, who the Bakgatla want them to lead them, but it's about who the state want to be in power. Oh, Melanie. Yes. Melanie, you talked about the forms of resistance. As I think I may have highlighted, maybe I rushed through quickly a lot, rapidly. But the general struggle against the chief, is based on allegations of corruption. And the main form, which it has taken in the past, I think triggered by the chief's response to it, is a terrain of formal law. It has been taken to the courts, mostly, because the chief would interdict people who want to meet and talk about it. So this is where it started, and then most of these battles, then the main form it has taken, the main form that these struggles have taken have been that of courts. And most of these struggles have been fought in courts, and that is why the court's interpretation of custom had been very crucial in these issues, because courts have interpreted custom. Strange, in 2010, recently, to be that the chief's version of custom reigns supreme, and it should overrule any version of custom that, I mean, by any ordinary member, which means that if the chief, according to his custom, he is the one who can decide who can meet and talk about what, then that is his version of custom. For instance, even land struggles, I mean, the same struggle that we've described earlier. For instance, in the village of Sefini, when the villagers or the descendants of the buyers took the matter to the court, the High Court in Northwest ruled that they do not have a local standard to claim ownership or control over land. The only recognized structure, according to custom, is that of the tribal authority, or what we call the traditional council. So that means the chief is the one who can stand on behalf of the community on land matters. So mainly these struggles have taken the terrain, I mean, have been fought in the courts, and that is how the response have come. But of course, there have been riots against the mine throughout the villages. I mean, people of